before that, we have tonight. And I was delighted when, as I say, my old friend John kindly agreed to talk here tonight. John probably needs no introduction, but he's going to get it anyway. Obviously, John is a highly distinguished, I have to read this because there's so much, but it will be fairly brief. John is a highly distinguished arts administrator, radio and television journalist and writer. I think most of us know that, but there's a whole other aspect here. John was born in Zlín, in then Czechoslovakia, in 1936, into a world on the brink of war. 2 days before the German occupation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939, John's father, also John Tusa, flew out of the country on a Bata company plane via Poland, Yugoslavia and France to arrive in the UK, and then brought his family out to join him. He became general manager at, and then later managing director at the Bata factory and its associated village in East Tilbury in Essex. British Bata Shoes, which was established by the Czechoslovak Shoe Company, followed its international pattern of development, and it created a pioneering live-work community around its model modern movement factory in, as I say, the town of East Tilbury in Essex. Estate houses, tennis courts, a swimming pool, factory buildings, all in for pretty conservative 1930s England, a radical modernist European architecture. And it established, I think, an entirely new way of working. Perhaps you could say it followed the Victorian Bourneville type model and so on and so forth in ethos, but obviously it brought that hard-edged European architecture. John, growing up initially near the factory, was educated at Gresham's and then went to read history at Cambridge. He joined the BBC as a radio producer in 1960, going on to present Newsnight in the early 80s, way before Paxman. Before showing how it could be done, should be done. Before becoming MD of BBC World Service, a post he held from 86 to 92. He then left the BBC and ran the Barbican Arts Centre, as you do, from 1995 to 2007. He was managing director and then became executive chairman of the Claw Leadership Programme, a post he held until 2014. He's written numerous books on the arts and co-authored books on history, the Nuremberg trial and the Berlin blockade, which he co-wrote with his late wife, Anne. His latest book, Bright Sparks, 7 Cases of Not Becoming Damp Squibs, is published by Bloomsbury Business. John's on architecture and tonight's topic, commented from the neo-Bauhaus modernism of my birth town, Bata Zlín, to the so-called brutalism of the Barbican, I have always lived comfortably with modernism. After all, it is the architecture of my life and times. Would you please welcome Sir John Tusa?
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be. Is that better? You could hear me without the microphone.
Well, good. Recording as well.
I see. Fine. Okay. The Bata Heritage Centre, all the images come from them, and Graham Sutcliffe is here. The Bata Heritage Centre very diligently looks after as much archive as they can collect at East Tilbury. And it is an extraordinary collection kept alive by people like Graham and his colleagues, who think that the history of Bata at East Tilbury is something which should be properly documented. And also, later on, I've got two short historic videos which come from the East Anglian Film Archive at the University of East Anglia. It's a marvelous archive. If any of you ever need anything connected with architecture and heritage, I think you'd be surprised by what the East Anglian Film Archive have. And I gave them all the Bata Company films, and they've catalogued them and digitized them. And I mean, it's a really, really remarkable job of archiving. So many, many thanks to them. So that is where we're right. Life in Bata Modernism. Those are the thanks. Now, that is Bata Zlín, centre of Bata Zlín. Anyway, for those of you, some of you may know East Tilbury, and you might say, Zlín, East Tilbury, spot the difference. And of course, the fact is, you can't. And that's the point. This was the Bata system. This was how it was done. This was how it was meant to be. This is how it expanded. This is how it could expand, because it was such an extraordinary system. Now, just in case, for those of you who don't know, Zlín is situated in the south of Moravia, the second province of what is now the Czech Republic, or Czechia, as it's sometimes inelegantly called. It's about 60 kilometers from Brno. And just to confuse people completely, Brno is much closer to Vienna than it is to Prague, but that's Central Europe for you, and that's one of the really, really important things. And it was there in what was pretty well empty country that Thomas Bata decided, for a variety of reasons which I won't go into here and I don't know too much about, that he was going to set up a shoe factory. And he couldn't just build plants for making shoes. You actually had to have somewhere for people to live. But he also believed, because this was the spirit of the times, that you had to provide the accommodation for the people who worked for you. So the 1920s and 1930s, it was communal, it was paternalistic, it was responsible, it was also necessary. I mean, you couldn't find the workers in southern Moravia because they needed tens of thousands of workers to work in Zlín. And it wasn't just right to build accommodation, it was absolutely necessary. Just as when we come to East Tilbury, why is there an estate there? Because otherwise there were only potato fields. You know, if you lived in southeast Essex, maybe you worked in the docks, but you're jolly lucky if you could get any work there. Chelmsford was miles away, Southend was miles away. There was no work at all, and that was one of the reasons why the company set up. It was invited to set up its headquarters there, and they had to build houses and homes. So these were a necessity. Now, the characteristics of it. Thomas Bata believed in the mass production of shoes. You didn't mass produce. Shoes were made by cobblers in those days. And how many people could actually afford shoes that were made by cobblers? Very, very few. Most of the world, as far as Tom Bata was concerned, went barefoot. And he saw that not just as a local market, but as a global market. It was always said, even in the Bata mythology and folklore, that in order to get people to buy shoes in India, of all places, the Bata store heated the pavement, if there was one, outside the shop, so that people in bare feet would say, oh my goodness, you know, isn't the pavement hot today? Or whatever it was, I must now go in and buy. Now, this is a silly story, but it was what Bata told about itself. But you know, for anybody to have that vision, Because after all, they call themselves shoemakers to the world. And there you are, you're in a tiny bit of Central Europe, which is very parochial anyway. And you say, shoemakers to the world. What an extraordinary vision that was. And he ended up building this extraordinary company and this extraordinary town in a very short period. Of its characteristics, and by this is still, and you'll see some pictures, some images later, pretty well recognizable. One of the things that he believed in, the paternalism, yes, community. This is Społeczeński Dom, community house. In due course, as you'll see, when they built East Tilbury, what did they do? The main building, just like this, a bit smaller, was called Community House. Funny word, community, can't have meant very much in southeast Essex in the 1930s. In a way, it's not an English word at all, or an English sense. But that's the center, the heart of Zlín, and its equivalent, as you'll see, is at the center of East Tilbury as well. And so community was at the heart of it. And I mean, that is the size of the factory, built from scratch in the middle of lower southern Moravia from nowhere. And note the housing all around there. I'm sure that there wasn't enough housing for everybody, but there was a lot of housing for many people. I have a feeling, I happened to be there in Zlín about 3 weeks ago because the wonderful Peter Murray organized a trip, and by happenstance I was able to go on it. And the people I was with said, "Now, do you remember where you lived?" I said, "Well, I do and I don't. I believe it's an area called Zlín, and it is there." And as we drove through it, they said, "Now, can you remember which house it is?" I wish I could. What I do remember, because I saw it in 1948, and they were very nice houses. Anyway, so they're built in the 30s, 100 years later, not doing badly, as all the factory buildings are. But that was how cohesive the community was. That is the main office building, which we'll come to later. And yeah, so there's community house, then in front, Obchodny Dom, the house of shops. So you have community for welfare and shops because people need to shop. Somebody said, did that mean that all the prices were rigged and all the profit went back to Bata? I honestly don't know. I mean, nobody ever said that there was anything particularly rapacious about the pricing of Obchodny Dom, but that was the idea. If you want people to live here, they need work, they need home, they need community, and they need shops. And this little feature, which has often been written about, is the famous elevating mobile chief executives lift. It doesn't look much like that. I was always told about this lift, and that Tom Bata, or Jan, his half-brother, could go up and down, stop at any one of the 12 floors, get out and find out what was going on. And it's presented in this cutting. It says, "This is very convenient so that workers can come and see the boss." That wasn't the reason he did it. Really wasn't. Incidentally, 100 such offices are to be made in lifts. No. This is the only one. I was always told about this, and I didn't quite believe it. And I didn't think that it existed. And it was a fortnight ago, as with Peter Murray and his friends, we went into the main office building, and they said, "And the office lift is there." I said, "Do you mean the office lift?" And they said, "Yes." So, really? And there it was. And it almost smelt like a Bata lift. Yes, and really, and something about the layout on the right-hand side are shoe samples. My father's office in East Tilbury had glass cabinets like that with the shoe samples. And I said, was that Tom Bata's chair or Jan Bata's chair? And they said, yes, probably. So I said, can I sit in it? And they said, yes. And I did. And as I say, I really didn't believe until that moment a fortnight ago that A, the lift existed, or B, anybody could do anything with it. And I allow myself a piece of imaginative fantasy. When my father, aged 22, and he was a young accountant, and the founder, Thomas Bata was always known as the founder, always. And my father wanted to get married, so he was summoned and told that he had to go and see the founder to get permission. So he went, and the founder said, do you have enough money? So my father presented his Bata paybook and his savings account, because that was open. You didn't have a private saving. Well, you might have a private savings account, but you had a Bata savings account. And the founder looked through this and said, well, you seem to have enough money. You seem to have money. Now, who are you going to marry? He said, well, this is very nice young woman who works in the Bata retail shop. Does she come from a good family? Yes, she comes from a very good family, and they live just over the hills in a little town called Bystřice pod Hostinem. What does her father do? Well, her father is, of course, a small farmer, as everybody was, but he's also a chairman, a foreman in the Tonnet factory. You all know Tonnet, and there's a Tonnet factory in Bystřice pod Hostinem. And so the founder said, that's fine, you have enough money, you're marrying somebody respectable and good, you may marry. My little fantasy is that Tom Bata sat in that chair and my father sat opposite him while they had that conversation. Nobody can prove that it didn't happen, but I feel that the spirit of it is there. So paternalist, communal. I mean, in a way, it's terribly shocking. Actually, some people were sort of shrugging their shoulders and said, do you really mean to say that there was a Bata savings account which the boss could look at? Yes, that was paternalistic, it was communal. Was it authoritarian? Yes, it was authoritarian, of course it was. It was also incredibly disciplined. I mean, it was a hard company to work for. They really did not tolerate failure, but they had the systems to allow people to succeed. And so, the deal was a good job, training, good accommodation, a strong welfare community. I mean, they had all these things. They had football teams, etc. And also, I don't know if you know about the big nationalist athletic movement called Sokol. Almost all the young men, maybe the young women as well, but I only ever saw it with the men, took part in organized gymnastics and parallel bars and things like that. This was all part of the ethos, not just in Czechoslovakia, not just in Bata in the 1920s and the 30s, because you wanted people to be healthy and to have the opportunity to be healthy. So it was communal, certainly, paternalistic, yes, and authoritarian, undoubtedly. The authoritarian bit, of course, had a heavy price, because in 1932, Thomas Bata was in a hurry to get somewhere. That was the company plane. And the pilot said, it's not safe to fly. And he said, but Thomas Bata said, we must get there, you must fly. Pilot said, it really isn't safe. And but the founder insisted, and I think just a few, and it was foggy, the weather was really bad. And in a fairly short distance from the end of the runway, the pilot presumably was disoriented and crashed, and Thomas Bata was killed, 1932. But look at what he had done in the 12, 15 years before then. It was extraordinary, but therefore, the authority of the person was then the cause of his downfall. But what he'd also done in the meantime, he had created, and the more I think about it, the more extraordinary I think it is, he created a system. I mean, it wasn't just that the buildings are standardized, and they are standardized wherever there is a Bata factory. I've seen these buildings. East Tilbury, of course, a place called Bata Best in Holland, near Eindhoven. I've been to the Indian one, Bhatanagar, just outside Calcutta. It's all like this. It's a system, because what Tom Bata created, and in a very, very short time, was not just an architectural system, but the methods of production and management that went with it. So this is it today. I mean, they don't manufacture anymore, of course, but there are museums and things like that. There's a university, and it is a very prosperous town indeed. And that is all due to him. And as I say, the layout of the housing, I mean, there's so much that is still similar to this day. This is also a picture from today, taken from the top of the office building. And this is the grave of the architect, Karfik, who built Zlín. The person standing by it is my cousin's wife, because Karfik's grave is in a little town called Bystrica pod Hostinem, which is where my mother came from, and where the Sklenar family graveyard plot is immediately adjacent to that. So that's another sort of extraordinary piece of tying in. Now, as I said, spot the difference. That is Bata, East Tilbury in 1934. Not only was Thomas Bata, running Zlín and everything, he was also setting up satellite companies. That is a very, very, actually 1934, a very early East Tilbury picture. That's the office building. That's the first row of houses, and I think you can see there, clearly they have flat roofs. And that is named after Thomas Bata Avenue, still there. And the developers, because there's some new housing, which you'll see later there, and the commercial developers, I think rather nicely, the houses they put there also have flat roofs. So there's a little bit of homage to the spirit of East Tilbury. Now, it's really very, and that's the panorama of what the factory at East Tilbury would be, what it would become, and lo and behold, there is Bata Community House. It was a joke which only came to me many, many years later, that we'd left southern Moravia in late 1939, traveled across Western Europe, got onto the train at Harwich, rumbled into Liverpool Street, somehow got from Liverpool Street to East Tilbury, and what did we find? Did we find something English? No. We found good old Zlín. And it was only a kind of joke, which I saw later. Now, the person who was sent to run this was my father, who was 30 at the time. And Tom Bata, apart from vetting his marriage, had also spotted him as a bright young man who was very good with numbers and extremely efficient. And at short notice, only a matter of weeks, in May, June 1939, he was told, go and run the factory in the United Kingdom. My mother and father always said that they had a choice. Now, I can't find any of that in the records. And the choice was, would you like to run the Bata factory in South Africa, or would you like to go and run it in England? And fortunately, they chose England. I've always wondered what I would have become if I'd gone to South Africa. But so at a few weeks' notice, this young man, aged 30, came to East Tilbury to run the company. He wasn't, though, alone, because the point is that the Bata system was a system. It wasn't just the architecture. They came, there was a whole cadre of people who came with them. The chief accountant was Czech. The deputy chief accountant was Czech. The head of leather production was Czech. The head of rubber production was Czech. The chief engineer was Czech. Why? Because they knew how the system worked. The whole thing, the architecture, how the place worked, lock, stock, and barrel, was replicated from Zlín, Bata Zlín. It couldn't have worked otherwise, because I mean, this was built within 10 years or so. That was the early buildings in 1938. Already there you can see community house has been built. That, I think, is the leather factory. But I mean, the speed at which it all went up is absolutely extraordinary. And one of the things, of course, that was also replicated was the sense of having all the facilities there. Now, why did Bata have to have a farm? Because they undoubtedly, apart from growing potatoes in southeast Essex, could they actually provide enough food for a factory of 3,000 people? I don't for a moment think that the farm or that Bata East Tilbury was self-sufficient. It was part of the philosophy, because in those days, just going back to Zlín for a moment, you didn't outsource things. No, if you were in southern Moravia, where did you get your leather from? There wasn't a tannery, Bata had to build it. Where did you get your rubber from? Well, you got that from West Africa, but you had to process it. Textiles, well, Brno may have been a textile city, but it wasn't that sort of textile. So, and the belief anyway was that you kept control of the whole of production and everything to do with life. And that was partly what you see here. The Bata farm was just one of those things. I always thought it was, and I think it probably was, a sort of pleasant amenity. But it also tells you something about the fundamental philosophy of East Tilbury, that the entire community was there. And by the by, it is still, if you go there, it's a very isolated community. There's one small road and there's one crummy railway line. And so things like this weren't just an affectation. They were partly necessary. Were they the most necessary thing? No, but they were part of the philosophy of this is the community, this is what we do. And now, quite my favorite building. Here we are. This is the classic flat roof Bata East Tilbury house. Now, I mean, look at it. Look at it. Southeast Essex, England, wet winters, flat roofs. What are you talking about? And the balcony. Look at the balcony. Now, balcony is terrific if you're in Central Europe, those hot summers. What I also find interesting is that there's a garage this may be a bit later. There weren't many cars, but that was the house that I and my family lived in for a year or so. But talk about strange. If you think of what the rest of Southeast Essex was like, this was very strange indeed. But it's not bad, and it's lasted, and it was perfectly more than comfortable to live in. And again, what do you have? Because it is an isolated community. You have to have entertainment, Bata cinema, naturally, with two programs per week and showing every day. That was part of the welfare. It then became later, as you can see, East Tilbury Village Hall, so it had multiple uses. That's just going back a bit, because that I like because it shows you how absolutely desolate. Well, it's the Tilbury Marshes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the Tilbury Marshes, but they are the Tilbury Marshes. And so to have a community of several thousand people, 3,000 people, by the way, worked at Bata East Tilbury. 3,000 people, so multiply that for their families. So it must have had a multiplier effect on upwards of 10,000 people in the community. And that is pretty important. They repaired your cars as well. And well, the fire brigade was terribly important. There was a fire once, but if there hadn't been a Bata fire brigade and there had been a fire, then it would have taken several hours for anybody to get there, and even a Karfik-designed Bauhaus concrete and brick building would, I think, have had a great deal of damage done to it by the time. So that's all part of the total service. By the way, the tall man in the middle is the chief engineer, you check, and the shorter man is my father, who was the managing director. But they were very proud of the fire brigade. Inside the factory, here is the conveyor belt at work. Here, I'm pretty sure they're making Wellington boots. You see, pulling the upper over the last. And I mean, you can see how many people there are on the conveyor belt just to make one pair of wellies. So it really was stripping down the whole business of what went into a shoe into a series of very distinct and precise activities. Now, I don't know what the shoes on the right are, but I think it's significant that the textile machinists are on the left, and I bet that they were producing the inners for probably leather footwear there, but they would be side by side. And when you see the number of people on the conveyor belt, this is also making one shoe, you see how mass production really had been broken down into its elements and ingredients. I really love this. This is quality control. And I mean, I don't think that was a fluke. So there are five people examining the shoes as they come off the conveyor belt. One I really like is him. I mean, is he going to let a dud pair of shoes through? No. Part of the folklore, incidentally, was that my father, who went round the factory every week, he walked the entire factory. A friend of mine, by the way, a few years ago said, I've just been on a management course, a cabinet management course. This was when I was at the BBC. I said, yes, what do they teach you? He said, MBWA. I said, and what's that? He said, it's management by walking around. And I said, the Bata organization was doing that 40 years ago. Never mind, British catch up eventually. But it was all said that when my father walked round, he would go into a storeroom, he'd point up and say, bring down that box of shoes, let's see, he'd bring it down, he'd open it, and that was the box which had one brown, one black pair, one black shoe in it. But whether that's true or not, almost certainly not, that's the sort of reputation that you need. But that also is a reputation which reflects the concern for quality. That's the hosiery, the hosiery department. And they were very good, Bata was very good at giving prizes and rewards. You'll see a little bit of sports day, but they enjoyed giving rewards. I mean, you know, look at all the stuff. I mean, nobody would do that now. Arguably, nobody would want any of that, but they did. They did, but because that was part of the transaction. You know, these things were part of why you worked for Bata. Annual Family Gala Day. By the by, I'm not sure if I've got it on video, but tug of war, people really did love tug of war. They really did, and departments tugged against one another. And also notice that the factory will be open. So the company wanted the families to see where their husbands, wives, sons worked. And that was also part of the welfare offer. This is the son of the founder, Thomas Bata Jr. What is he doing? He's shaking hands with 5 people who've been with the company for 25 years. And when you've been with the company for 25 years, it wasn't just that you got to shake hands with the son of the founder, but you got a gold watch. And there is the dinner for the long service people. You see in the front a mere 20 years, but all the way back there are people who either got 25 years on that occasion, or presumably they will have been recipients of the honour beforehand. So the fact that people worked, okay, the circumstances were completely different. Where else would you have worked if you were in Southeast Essex? But I think if the conditions had been awful, people would not have lasted for as long as that. But 20 years, 25 years, on all sorts of other occasions, you had a dinner and recognition and acknowledgement of what you'd done. Now, this is Coronation Day. And Bata, there was a big celebration of Coronation Day. Being a foreign company, and it always knew it was foreign, by the by, it was extremely patriotic. And so Coronation Day was very, very important. There you are, there's the families coming in. And I mean, almost every building, I mean, the amount of bunting that was put up, and I love that, long reign our queen. Only a foreigner would say that. And there's sort of innocence about it. We know we're foreign and we're incredibly patriotic and loyal, but long reign our queen. That is what we think, that is what we believe, and that is what we celebrate. I mean, how did they get the bunting to the top of the hotel? They certainly didn't put up scaffolding, and I bet health and safety didn't approve of people probably hanging over from the top of the roof to do it. The film of the coronation at Bata Cinema, and you see that's after all, it's 1953. Nobody had been able to paint the company buildings for 10, 15 years, and that is what they look like. The retail shops, by the way, underneath what became Bata Hotel, with a row of retail shops, so you could, of course, buy your shoes and your groceries and your chemist and things like that. And there's the sports field, that's the Thames, and the sports field famous for all sorts of things, including the fact that West Ham United used to train there, because in the days when First Division, as it probably was then called, football grounds were mud by Christmas, some of you will remember that, they came and trained here, because my father was very keen on football. He supplied West Ham with football boots. They would come and would train here quite often. And in return for that, we got seats in the director's box at West Ham. And here on Coronation Day, I see, words are superfluous. I mean, it looks as if almost every family had actually put one of their children into fancy dress. Couldn't do that now. So it was a great outpouring of national pride, and the company showing that it was proud of that's my mother on the right. She was always giving out prizes. And they I said, they really loved the tug of war. They really, really did. And I mean, there's so many people who they got to take part in the tug of war. That's the extraordinary thing. You wouldn't be able to do that now. You wouldn't suggest doing it. It's a different world. It's a completely different world. But that was the spirit of the time. And look at how people dress. Look at the hats. After all, this is 1950, 75 years ago, you'd expect there to be differences, and there certainly are. Oh, a lot of running. There's another video somewhere where there are people doing the high jump. There are people throwing the javelin. I mean, if you went into any company now and said, we're going to have a company sports day, and by the by, one of the events we're going to have is the javelin. Who'd like to take part in the javelin? How many people would take part? Or they said, there's the high jump. And they said, high jump? The only high jump we know is from the Human Relations Department. So different time, different responsibilities, and a different way of expressing. Oh, look at that! Even the ladies' department, if that is what it was. So a terrific case of patriotism and community. Now, this actually look at that. War saving certificates. It all depends on you. So this must have been during the war. I've included this because these are people coming out, workers. They were always called workers. They were coming out at lunch because people had lunch. There was at least an hour's lunch break. In Zlín, the lunch break was 2 hours. Here, so they were mainly going over to Bata Hotel, where there was a canteen. Most of the managers went to the houses on the estate for lunch, where they could have a good, proper Czech lunch, which they did. I'm not sure if we'll get through to it, but right at the end of this little clip, you see people clocking in, because people did clock in, and I think it's just worth running through for a minute or so, because look at the age of the people clocking in. So it wasn't all flat roofs, incidentally. There they are in the background, but the styles varied. There's the swimming pool, and the gardens. My goodness, people looked after their gardens. Being Czechs, there were an awful lot of plum trees and damson trees, and in some of them, they said there would be bags of sour cream, tvaroch, hanging from the tree, and the water, dripping from the cheese, so that it would become proper cheese. So that was all extremely folky. But it is how people wanted to live. I think this is one of the things about East Tilbury, there are the flat roofs again, is that the factory was modernist, the housing was yes, here you are. Look at the age of the people clocking in. Well, that was before raising the school leaving age to 16, so probably quite a lot of them were 15. And then by the 70s, the red brick and white had been replaced by the blue and white livery, which is what you have now. And just a few cosmetic changes. And that is now East Tilbury in 2023. Now I think we're now back. So if you go to East Tilbury now, there's quite a lot of infilling, but essentially, you can see there's some infilling there, and there's some new ones there with flat roofs. And the main factory buildings are used for things like storage. It's very sad. I've always thought that it should be the home of the South East Essex Technical College, but honestly, the communications are so bad. There's only one road, there's one railway, and anyway, the appetite isn't there. But the buildings won't fall down. You can be sure of that. My father ran it from 1939 to 1969, and the question is, where did Bata go wrong? Funnily enough, I never talked about it to him much. I think it was that when all the pre-pressed plastic shoes started to come internationally, I mean, nothing could be further from the conveyor belt principles of Bata, absolutely nothing. And I think the company simply didn't know how to respond. So it changed from being a company with 3,000 workers, 1,000 retail shops, 1,000 high street retail shops, and it just gradually died and vanished. But as many of you will know, it exists in many countries around the world, and in some parts of the world, the word Bata is the same word as shoe. So, but 30 years, 50 years for a particular style of manufacturing, of management, of social organization, of industrial organization, that's not bad. Lots of things don't last anywhere nearly as long as that, with that amount of impact. And in the meantime, apart from Bata Zlín setting up outposts all over the world, Bata East Tilbury, it's rather sweet. It followed, my father did it, it followed the British Empire. So it set up factories in the West Indies, and it set up factories in West Africa, but it was almost entirely following the flag. I'm sure they wouldn't have thought of it like that, but that's what it was. And a lot of that is still there. So it was of its time. It was a closed community in many respects. Sometimes people say, why didn't I go into it? And for very, very many reasons. First of all, my mother would have laid down in the road and prevented me from doing it, because she said, look at it. Look at the toll it's taken on your father of being part of a really deeply, enlightened in many respects, but also authoritarian community. I don't want you to be part of that. I'm extremely grateful that she said that. But I look back on Bata East Tilbury, Bata Zlín, I look back on Thomas Bata. If it wasn't for Thomas Bata recognizing the quality of a young man in his 20s, late 20s, and saying, go and run East Tilbury, I certainly wouldn't be here, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much.